Hi, today we are joined by digital sports reporter at The Sun Online, Joe Brophy. So, with your job, you actually started at The Sun as showbiz reporting, didn't you?
Yeah, it was SEO role as a showbiz journalist. That was it. I was at
So, how
Kent
did
with
you
you.
get into that role and then from there move into sports writing?
So for the first 2 years of uni, I did nothing to further a career in journalism at all. And then we got into the third year, and I still didn't, and I just needed money. So I started working at the student bar on campus just to pay the bills. And it got to like December, and it was like 6 months to go to the end of uni. I had no prospects at all, and I had to like close up the bar, and it was just stone cold, and I couldn't even lock the door. And I was just thinking on my way back home, I was just stuck out there in the Kent wind, and I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to be doing when I finish uni. I need a job. So straight over Christmas, I just wasted my Christmas holidays that year just constantly looking for something, and the only thing that popped up that was within London, within reach, was a SEO role and for showbiz, and I managed to apply for that, get an interview, went down to London in the January, and I'd already like researched the SEO roles, what they sort of entailed, and they just love Love Island. They like, what time's Love Island on? What? So all I said from my interview was Love Island. I can do Love Island. Give me Love Island, and they actually really went for that, and that's how I got that role. But because I was still at uni, they wanted someone 5 days a week, but we managed to do a deal where I'd work 3 days and do 2 days of uni and give up my Sundays. And so for like last 6 months until I graduated, I was just doing um, partly work going into London on my days off and then working at uni until I finished. And then that continued for about a year. Um, and then it got to about October, and I went out to the pub with someone that worked on the sports desk. And I really wanted to get into sport, but then I was kind of sick of showbiz because it was just saying what time things were on TV, what time's EastEnders on. I was like, I'm ready to move. And I was in the pub with someone from sports, and after a few tequilas, he was like, "Oh, I'm just really stressed about this weekend because we've got this big MMA fight, Conor McGregor and Khabib, and like, I have no one to cover." And I went straight away. I was like, "I'll do it. I'll help." And he looked at me like I was a crazy person. He was like, "Oh, you giving up your weekend for me for?" And I was like, "No, I'll do it." So I remember I came in that weekend, and he was still like disbelieving that I would do it. But I came in and I worked that shift, and it went really well. And then a few weeks later, they also needed someone for Tyson Fury's first fight with Wilder, so I came in and did that. And after then, I kind of impressed them, and it kind of just built up sports shifts from there.
And did you find it difficult at all trying to balance your work with your uni stuff for the last 6 months of uni?
That was horrible. That was probably my biggest hindsight would be that I should have gone in and got help to manage my schedule, because that's the amount of times that I think I'd have a Saturday. Saturday was my only day of the week that I had off completely. And I had this mentality when I woke up on a Saturday, I was like, this is my day off, I'm not doing anything. But that meant I'd work the Sunday into the Monday and then come home and have to go to the library Monday night to do all my uni work. So I'd have to kill myself on those days where I definitely should have broke it up more. That was my biggest balance. I really got that wrong at sometimes as well.
And did you like do any work experience or any writing before your job at the Sun?
Yeah, so in my second year, we everyone that did our course at Kent, we obviously went for a week's work experience at one of the Kent papers, and then I did a second week with them a few months later. And throughout second year, I was my only kind of sports thing on my CV up until then was I was Dartford Football Club's match day commentator, where I just write the match reports for them. And I did a little bit of work with KMTV, the Kent TV station, when it was first setting up. But when they were actually looking for real roles, I was like, I'm no good at TV. I was like, I'm terrible at that. I need to write. I was like, I cannot film and edit.
What would like a typical day in your job look like?
So when I was just in the office, it depends if it was just a regular day or you're covering something. Sometimes when you had a particular weekend shift, it'd be to cover an event, and it'd be to cover a pay-per-view or a big football match, and you'd have those on the screens all around, and everything would be geared towards that. You'd sit in your little like hubs who was covering the actual event, and you'd all like set out who's covering what, who's doing the match report, who's doing the player ratings, or who's doing the previews, all stuff like that, and you break it up, and then you'd have your own like zones where you could communicate. Now it's a lot more difficult to do that. But yeah, in the office, it was very efficiently run. Everyone had their own specific jobs to be breaking down for a whole day. You just you get like 20 minutes of lunch, and then you just sat at your desk and you're just working solidly through.
And what's your like day-to-day like currently working for the Sun, and how has it changed from like now to before lockdown?
So before lockdown, I still work on shift patterns throughout lockdown, but when, let's say, it was like a typical, you're doing your 9 to 5s, it would you'd be in the office, you'd be sat at this computer and a desk, and you'd have 2 screens, and you'd have your picture desk in front of you, you'd have graphics and video all around you. You were surrounded by your whole team to build an article, and your hub and your editors, and that was a lot easier to communicate with people, to be like, just go knock on the door of video, to be like, I need something for this article. Or whereas now, you wake up, I have my crappy little laptop that I've had since uni, and it's just a singular thing, and I'm just sat on my bed with the laptop in, trying to keep up. It's made breaking news a lot harder, because you're trying to cover news in the same way that we were before lockdown, but instead of a team of 6 or 7, you're now a team of 1, and everything's a lot slower. So that's a lot harder.
What's your favourite thing about sports reporting?
That it's the best job for someone who's not actually good enough to play sports for a living, to get paid to do it. So if you're not talented enough to actually do the sport, it's the next best thing. There are definitely so many cool things that I've done. I've been in stadiums to cover the matches in the press box, which is incredible. Like there's been events that I've gone to, I've covered. I've been up to Blackpool in January for a whole weekend to cover an event, and the people you get to interview are always interesting. So there are so many aspects to sports journalism that I've absolutely loved. There was one incident where I thought I'd always ended it before it began, where I was covering the Tyson Fury fight, and I was on the blog, and this was the time where it was about 500,000 people reading this. And before that, I'd never had those people, that many numbers. Not 500 people didn't care. 1,000 people cared about when EastEnders was on. They didn't. Or maybe they do, but they weren't Googling it. And that was the most I'd had on a blog. And I remember I got so excited, and I thought Tyson Fury was going to win. And on my last post before the last round, I went straight. I was like, surely Fury's going to win. Like, yay for Britain. And he got knocked down. And no one, apart from maybe Fury's family, was more thankful that he stood up than me, because I just told 500,000 people that he was about to win on points, and he got knocked. And I thought he got knocked out straight up the next blog post. And I was like, that's so embarrassing. I'm going to have to tell the editors that on the blog, they're going to read this. They're going to know I've just messed that completely up.
Were there like any new specific skills or anything that you learned for your roles, like showbiz reporting or sports reporting?
For sports reporting, I'd say my biggest thing that I learned was that you really need to have a passion for the sport that you don't really like. Like, if I'd love to say that I've just covered football all day, occasionally a bit of anything, combat, boxing, and anything like that. I hate cricket. I still hate cricket, and I hate Formula One. I'd watch it, but it's not one of my passions. But you need to have a conversation about it. I remember I was blogging for the Ashes for cricket, and I had like 100,000 people reading this thing, and I had no idea about cricket. I didn't write the terms, but they're reading this. They expect you to be some sort of cricket expert, and you don't have to be, but you definitely have to have enough to not look ridiculous. And I think the biggest thing for sport for me was to just educate yourself about if you're working for a company and they have like sections of sport, you pretty much have to have a good conversation about all of them, not just the ones that you like. For showbiz, I wasn't the best showbiz before. I'm gonna be honest with you. It sounds more impressive than it was when you say a showbiz reporter, because I really just told people what time things are on TV, and it was SEO. It was like, who is Chris Evans, and when did he star in Captain America? So Wikipedia was a better reporter than I was, because that's where I got a lot of my info from.
Would you say that having an NCTJ qualification is essential for your job?
Not at all. Not at all. I remember because I was still working with them. I'm so privileged that we do have that, because I like it, and I like what we studied. I thought we went to a great uni, we had a great course. But I do remember that I think it's important what area you're going into. I don't think I've ever needed it for sport. I think if you're doing media law and you're going into court reporting, or you have to do court reporting, I think that's very different. Personally, when I was still working there and I hadn't got my grades, I was quite worried about what I was going to get. And the way they were chatting at the time, they were happy almost for me to just sack it off, do uni, and just work there 5 days a week. I already had the job, which was the whole point of getting the grades in the first place. There was nothing. I've never had to use shorthand in my life since the day we passed our exam. I've never. No, I did it once as a joke to show someone that I could do it. But I'm nowhere close to 100 words anymore. I'm probably on about 10, so I've never used that. I'm trying to think what. I think the reporting helped me personally. I think it helped my style of writing, which some people could argue has helped where I've got to. So that's why there are things that I don't begrudge that we took, because I was definitely a better writer than I was after I did my reporting exam. But there are some things like public affairs and shorthand, which they've never no one cared about them. They're not something I boast about on the CV. And it's going to be more qualified people than me who will say if they're useful or not. But personally, apart from maybe the reporting and obviously court reporting, if you happen to go into that area, I can't think of too many areas where it's benefited what I'm doing now or in any way influenced it.
For your job, are there any specific programs or anything that you use, like CMS systems or InDesign or Photoshop or anything like that?
So we're lucky that we have a brilliant graphics department that do anything complex that I could never do. We use WordPress as a system, which is very user friendly, which I'm very thankful about. And CHP is our image system, where all outlets, all of that, we'll just post in there. And we're very lucky that our system is probably one of the easiest that I've seen to work. There's your biggest tool is your writing. What we do, which we're very lucky about, because we don't have to. We get spoon fed a lot with the people that we have. We've got way more talented people doing the pictures and the comps and the graphics and the videos. So I'm very lucky.
For like other people who want to do what you do, is there anything you'd recommend for them to do? Like any skills you think they should build up, or like any specific work experience you think they should try and get?
My biggest thing, depending on where you're working, where you want to work as a sports journalist, would definitely be to try and educate yourself about the sport you hate the most. Unless you're working for a specific outlet, unless it's specifically football site or a boxing site or something like that, you kind of do need to have an arsenal of all that there's way more to it than just you love football and you love maybe a couple of other sports. You really, as a sports reporter, you really need to know. Not like you have to love it, but again, Formula One, if you knew who's top of the leaderboard, what the race this weekend is, cricket, like you just need to know the rankings, of who's number one in tennis, just a basic sort of knowledge. For experience wise, I'm going to rip the band-aid off early. You're going to have to work weekends. People sometimes get so shocked when you tell them. They just think, oh, we work 9 to 5 and then we'll enjoy sport. You can't be a sports reporter and not work the weekends. That's when the sport happens. So it was easier for me because I was already working on the Sunday, so I just added a Saturday to it. But you've got to just give up your weekends because you've got to love it. For other experience, I'd always say if it's your passion, there should be always something that you can do. If you just love football, there will be a club that you can do some sort of match reporting for, something basic, maybe something. I know a load of people do podcasts for sport. I had one in uni myself, and I think it's always better to constantly have some sort of sport passion project going on the side that you can show off to people, whether it be a podcast or a blog or anything that you want. That's what I probably recommend the most. I think sometimes there's a tendency for people to overwrite. I think because when you're a sports reporter, a lot of the people that come into our offices and they'll do their first shift, their first day of articles, it's very wordy. They almost want to paint too much of a picture in the fact that they read maybe a column piece or a really in-depth interview where you're telling someone's story, and in those cases it works perfectly. But sometimes you're just there just to bullet point tell someone it's sport. You don't have to go the whispering curve of the brilliant ball. Like you don't need to thesaurus every single word to. And I think after people, that would be a big tip for me, if because it's something definitely I did, and my style of writing now is so much more concise than it was when I first joined. There's so much you don't realize how wordy sometimes things are. It can just be. I think there's almost like a tendency where people don't want to sound too simplistic. They want to show that they're good at writing and they've studied writing, and they're scared that if you just said something really simple. But when you're working in sport, you've got to think about your audience as well. And a lot of the times they're there just to hear what happened, just to hear what someone said. You don't need the accompanying audio to be really fancy. You can sometimes just let the quotes speak for themselves. So you don't have to dance with them and have a little jig before you just get to what you're trying to say.
Do you think that's the same with newspaper reporting as well, or would it be like longer pieces for newspapers rather than online?
I worked a little bit as a news journalist last year. I had a few shifts each week, and in practice it's pretty much the same, especially for a tabloid. That a lot of the times you're not, unless it's an exclusive interview or you're a columnist being paid for your opinion, it's not really your job to be given an opinion on what you're there just to tell the story, tell the news. Sometimes obviously there's a bias depending on what political leaning your outlet is, and you can see that in the headline. But I was never ever advised whenever I worked on news to particularly write something in a certain way. And a lot of the times what I did is you'd publish an article and an editor would read through it and try and correct any typos or anything like that. I'd always go back like an hour later and check what the changes they made. And more often than not, it was just cutting it down. There's too much fat on what you're saying. You just need, it's too chunky. You just cut it down. And I've been told that loads with even cover letters. You just be short and just tell them. And that is pretty much what you kind of have to do as a reporter. You're there just to say the facts. That's it. Obviously, you have to be good at writing as well. But I'm imagining if you're even pursuing this industry, you're good at writing. So you don't need to overly prove to anyone you're good at writing. You already know you're good at writing.
What would you say about your job that people might not actually know? Like, I feel some people don't know that it's not actually you who writes the headline sometimes. Like, it's a completely different team.
Yeah. I've long been of the agreement that if you're writing a story, there should be just one more than one byline on it, because the headline is decided by your editor, who's also decides to pitch the story. It's very rarely that I'll do a story that I pitch for, unless it's an exclusive. In that case, usually it's the reporter who's come up with the story, or very rarely I can pitch and I'll be like, can I do this? And I'll be like, okay. But usually you log in for the day and you're sent an email about what they want you to do first. You're given about an hour to do it, to publish an article, until they're like, well, why are you working slow? Hurry up. And then you'll send the next one. And they source this information from online, and that's their job. as the editors in the homepage. They'll scour around, and then they'll decide how to run the angle. They'll write the headline, they'll send it to you, and then that's kind of your fixed top line. You can't really just go with a different angle, because that's the way they want you to open the story. And then pictures, that's a different team. We don't source our own pictures. We don't source our own video. That's a completely different team. And sometimes they'll go back in and edit the story. So it's your byline on an article, but a lot of the time there is about 5 or 6 people who have had access and tweaked it in certain ways, and people don't get that at all. They think the one I get the most often is people thinking it was like, I've walked in on an 8 a.m. on a Monday morning and I've told them I'm doing this article, I'm writing it in this way. It's the furthest thing from the truth. That's not what happens at all. You get told, and sometimes there's collaboration. If there's something I really don't want to write in a particular way, then I'll have to complain. But it's usually it's a breakdown. It's a way of working. It's a system.
Is there anything with your role that you like have struggled with in any way?
Yeah, I would say what we were just discussing. I sometimes have an issue with the way stories are conveyed. I appreciate tabloids' purpose in the fact that, they're for a lot of people, they're fast news. They're not there to sit there and read an in-depth investigation. If they want to, there's definitely things out there that they can find. But a lot of the times they're just ready for Twitter, click, 5 lines, I've got the gist of it. But sometimes that means you have a tendency to go too sensationalist, and sometimes there's not a need. And that's probably the bit I struggle with most, when they kind of, there's no need sometimes to sensationalize. And I'd like probably more autonomy on what I write to a degree. I'm quite a young, inexperienced reporter, so it's quite a lot to ask for, but that's probably the thing I'd like most.
With stuff like that, is it something that you just have to deal with, or are you then able to go and push back if you strongly believe that you want to do it differently?
There has been 1 or 2 articles, I think, since I've worked there, which one I just didn't want to write completely. Sometimes, and I did, after a lot of pushback, we did agree that article was getting scrapped. I think sometimes when something big, I remember when Kobe Bryant in January, there was a lot of nature to just get out content, because people were just desperate to know what had happened, every detail. And because of that rush, there wasn't a pause to actually give yourself time to write, to know everything, and just to see how some stories would connect. And that would be the biggest thing. Sometimes when you're given a headline, and the editors generally just make a mistake, like they'll make a mistake, like a reporter would make a typo. They don't read into the story enough, and they give it to you. And that was the biggest thing I've learned, is when I'm given a headline, it's up to me as well to then go research to make sure this story stands up, because they might give you an angle and you'd be like, that's about what someone said, and you'd be like, when you read it, be like, that's not actually what he said, so we can't really write that.
Have you ever had conflicting views, personally, than the view of the Sun, and how have you had to deal with that?
Absolutely, yeah. Maybe I shouldn't have answered that so quickly. But yeah, I think it's no surprise that they're a right-wing paper. I'm not, personally, in my personal life. I'm quite happy, maybe not happy, lucky that sport, for the most part, is very apolitical. There are no real bias that I ever have to kind of include in my writing. I think the only time ever politics have even closely entered what I've tried to say was, I think it was election day, and I think there was a Tory chairman of a football club that was talking about Labour's policies at the time on election day, and I had to report what he said. I think maybe had I been a Tory myself as a reporter, it could have been, it would have been a lot harsher in the way the quotes come across than I wrote it. Personally, in my opinion, I think I wrote it very neutrally, and I just kind of let him say, because it's in the public interest for what he says. I don't think personally I need to insert whether I agree or disagree with him. It's not opinion based. So that's kind of how I treat any sort of politics that comes my way. In that, if it's a quote piece, I let them speak. It's up to them. It wasn't so much politics, but there was an interview I did once with a boxer, Pulev, who's actually supposed to be fighting Anthony Joshua this year. Last year, there was a video of him kissing a female reporter that went round, and people were very upset, and rightfully with that. And I interviewed his girlfriend at the time, and she was very defensive of him. And there were aspects of her interview that I didn't agree with. So I just kind of, I'm letting the reader make up their mind for it. I'm not there to tell them that I don't agree with what she said. Personally, I don't, and I'd be fine answering that if anyone asked. But I don't need to tell every reader that's reading it that I don't. If I happen to get asked, it's different. But I would just kind of let her words speak for herself, and then as the reader, you're going to decide if you don't like them or if you do. That's up to you. Until I'm a columnist, which I don't think I'll ever be, because I don't like throwing my opinion in the midst of a big crowd of just diverse opinions, because you're never gonna please everyone. So I like to keep opinions out of my reporting as best I can.